press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
Hello viewers and hello listeners. Welcome to Jaipur Dialogue USA on Sunday 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Now this is important for us to remember that the Jaipur Dialogue USA is creating a new narrative for NRIs globally. And what is important here is that in collaboration with Jaipur Dialogue India, where you have seen me many times, we want to focus on the diaspora, what is happening out here. So we are going to talk today about Indo-US relationships. Where is it heading towards? Because we know that India-US relationship been through many manifestations of strategic relationships, key relationships, partners in life, the same system, same democracy, large democracy, big democracy, but somewhere along the line, something gets missing. And that's a matter of fact. The latest one is that the Indian diaspora in the United States is appearing to be heading towards a headlong clash of, harassment. We are being targeted. We are probably becoming victims of hate crimes. A kind of a hinduphobia exists. To discuss all these matters today, I have great pleasure in welcoming Dr. Adit Adityanjee, who has established, is a very interesting resume for Dr. Adit Adityanjee. He is an AIMS physician, and he did his medicine from All India Institute of Medical Sciences. He's a psychiatrist, very well poised to analyze things from the mental perspective as well. And he has established Council of Strategic Studies, which very established people in this group to basically position the Indian issues in front of the US government, machinery, media, and we are working towards that in a very positive way. So welcome to the show, Adityanjee. And you already heard my opening statement in this one. If you want to add something about yourself, you are welcome to do so. And the other part which I wanted to say was that we need to start this with reference to the Indians in US. And then we can touch upon the diaspora, because Indians in USA are virtually the voice of NRIs all over the world. Because US being a huge economy, huge political entity, we are a very respected lot. And I will give you the ground to start with, that once upon a time, a senator once told me that we love you Indians as immigrants to this country. You are educated, you are hardworking, you have family values, you take care of your children, you are least problem from a law and order perspective, apart from the original white collar crimes. You take care of your children, you are in the highest median income, and you ask for nothing. That was a very key operative term. You ask for nothing. Today, we are looking at a scenario where various issues on which Indians are being attacked, we are virtually, made to feel as if we are the unwanted lot. So I want you to share that thought as an Indian, because I did not come to this country with the atmosphere that I'm seeing against Indians when I came here in 1991. This is not the United States I came to.
Well, thanks a lot, Vibhuti ji, for inviting me to Jaipur Dialogue, the New York edition. A little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs that I head. It's a think tank which basically wants to foster good bilateral relationship between India and United States. Council for Strategic Affairs does several activities. One of them is a monthly roundtable dialogue. If people are interested, they can join us every second Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Daytime. There is a standard roundtable discussion by Council for Strategic Affairs. We also hold one lecture by a distinguished guest once a month. And for the month of May 2021, the distinguished lecture will be given by Singye Sering, who is the executive director of Institute of Gilgit and Baltistan, and he will be speaking on continued occupation of Gilgit and Baltistan. So those are the kind of activities Council for Strategic Affairs does. We organize events, symposia, and we publish online, on websites, newspapers, etc. So that is what Council for Strategic Affairs does. Now, in relation to the question you said that you did not come to US to face this kind of situation that we are having, despite being so-called model minority. And I think this is reflective of the churning that is going in the US society. From a socio-anthropological perspective, if you see US society, there are problems. Nobody can deny that there are no problems. And yes, when you and I came, probably in the same year in this country, things were very different. But situation has changed. And despite being model minority, Indians are being targeted. There is definitely hinduphobia. I would acknowledge that. And we can discuss what are the determinants of hinduphobia and all that sort of thing. I'm also very concerned. Indian Americans of Sikh faith have been particularly targeted in this country, for their outward appearance. So it's not just hinduphobia, it is also xenophobia, which involves some targeting innocent bystanders also. We are also seeing as part of hate crimes against Asian Americans. You and I know, whatever the reason, there is a spurt of hate crimes against Asian Americans. In the last couple of years, the US society is actually fraying. You have seen things like Black Lives Matters and things like that. So everything has to be judged in context of that. I think there are serious problems, internal problems in the US mainstream society. And when people in the established positions, the people who ran the country, felt threatened that there is some challenge to the power, there are people or a group of people who are rising without demanding anything. I think there are bound to be jealousies. There are bound to be some behaviors that are acting out behaviors. And unfortunately, whether it is business, whether it is small business, whether it is motels run by Gujaratis, whether it is 7-Eleven run by people, whether it is, let's say, an Indian American taxi driver in New York City, whether it is a college professor, whether it is a physician, I think what we are seeing is some amount of, I won't say hatred, but at least animosity towards Indian Americans. And in US academia, we have seen gradual evolution of certain feelings, from tolerance, from possible superficial acceptance. What we are seeing is hinduphobia. And what we are also seeing is India-phobia. And what the third dimension of it, what we are seeing is Modi-phobia. And all these three things have become intertwined, so that college professors, whether they are in Rutgers, whether they are, in University of Chicago, where they are so-called Sanskritists, they have, in a very crass manner, started to attack Indians, Hindus, and India's leadership. And I think it's very unfortunate. When things are going good, nobody bothers about anything. When the pie is small and there are different people demanding a part of the pie, problems come. Right now, we have seen over a period of time US economy going down overall. And I think there is a sort of shortage of fiscal resources, even in this country. You know, we can print as many dollars as we can and do deficit financing. But ultimately, if the economy is not doing good, people will be unhappy. And people who feel they are in privileged position, they will start acting out, and that seems to be happening. And unfortunate victims are Indian Americans.
You have made a very comprehensive presentation of the reasons, causes, but there are certain things which we need to address as Indians here. So now you are a psychologist, and you are, you analyze situations from a different perspective. So you mean to say that our success is a cause of Hinduphobia? Is because no, I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. So if the economy is in turmoil, you go to the people who have contributed successfully to the system to make the pie bigger. You don't hit at those who are contributing to the pie instead of trying to destroy the pie itself. That's one part. The second part also is very important, that respect. The academia and everywhere else, it is correct that Prime Minister Modi has brought about significant inspiration to the NRI community as a whole to be proud of their Indian heritage and everything else, which is now being termed as rise of Hinduism, the Hindutva. So the question that I have in mind is from academia and other things, is that why is it so directed? It's not that US economy is, yes, going through one of the saddest part in the US that I see between 91 when I came here and today, is that politicians who drive the narrative are at loggerheads today. You see an absolute hatred between a Democrat and a Republican. They are both trying to get at each other's throat. I didn't see that in 91, but one thing you totally understood, that whatever the differences be between the Republicans and Democrats, they were all working together for the country called United States of America. Today's politicians are looking at exploiting every single difference that exists between the various minority and immigrant groups. How do you, I see that from my limited perspective, I see that the politician is driving a very divisive agenda. It almost looks like, wow, this is what the British must have done to India in their policy of divide and rule. What do you say about that?
I think you are exactly on the target. Politicians, when they face a threat, existential threat, they indulge in polarizing the society. And that is what we have witnessed in the US society, that politicians are polarizing the society and they have to find scapegoats, okay? Because they cannot take the blame on themselves. Why we are in this mess? So they have to find somebody on which the anger can be deflected. And if anger cannot be deflected or anger cannot be targeted towards the mainstream society or the privileged groups, then you have to start displacing that anger onto targets with whom the privileged group does not identify with, something which is very foreign, quote unquote. And I think at this point in time, we are seeing actually hatred or animosity or hostility directed towards a number of immigrant groups: Indians, Hindus, Sikhs, Asians. When I say Asians, I would say Oriental Asians, because Indians are also Asians. So the animosity and hostility is being driven towards these groups. And it is a sad situation that, US society, from a socio-anthropological perspective, was divided. You had the privileged white, you had the, Black and brown communities or so African American community. And then there was this stream of immigrants. And yes, there were, power struggle and, issues of allegations of exploitation between the main, privileged white society versus Black and brown people or African Americans. But when it comes to, let's say, immigrant groups, whether they are Oriental Asians, Asian Americans, or whether that is Indians, both the groups, target their hostility and anger towards these groups. So people who are claiming to be victims of white privilege dominance are also utilizing their American experience for targeting another immigrant group or another group which is small in size but not necessarily marginalized economically or academically or professionally. So these are very interesting times when you see the behaviors unfolding from various societal groups.
That brings me to a specific issue of us Indians.
Yeah.
Right now, there is definitely a phobia operating against various groups, and recent incidents in New York City and many other cities, Los Angeles, against the Jews. That's another minority. The violence that I saw, the people indulging in the kind of violence in New York City on Diamond District, for that matter, was not a good sight to see, because there is a violence that happens because there is a theft and a robbery. There's a violence that happens because of police intervention in two groups of people fighting. But this was a planned attack when a bunch of people belonging to, supportive of Palestine and Hamas, they indulged in beating innocent civilians with knowing fully well that nothing will happen to them, because at this point in time, the political disposition is more sympathetic towards their consideration. Now, what I want to say here is very simple, is that what do we Indians need to do here? I mean, in addition to we are always a kind of people, we are most peaceful community in the world. At least I believe that. And I believe with good reason that we are the most peaceful people in the group, in the world, and in this country particularly. What do we need to address the tirade that comes from very vested group of people? And I have no problem in mentioning those. Even institutions like CARE, institutions like AIMC, they make a very vicious attack, which also includes many Indians who are supportive of the old Congress ideology and are thus basically disposed towards everything that Modi says and does is a human rights violation. It's immediately branded as such. So 80% of Indians being Democratic Party and Democrats running the country at this point in time, many Indians claim that Biden listens to them and he hears them. They talk about varieties of things, including India offering a military base to United States. How do you relate with this scenario, our ability to influence the current administration?
I think you have made a number of observations, so I'll go sequentially through those issues. It is again said that in 21st century, there is a directed physical attack on safety of Jewish people. We thought in the civilized world, in the so-called civilized world, that once Holocaust happened, once was more than enough. Never again. I think we have seen now germination of seeds of revival of anti-Semitic movement in this country. And there's a fertile ground that there's a group of people who are exploiting the constitutional freedoms and have obtained a part in the power structure and are attacking another minority. And it is sad that the system is not doing anything. And if I can, look back home, it's the same kind of scenario. Infiltrating the power structures, demanding special privileges, playing the victim card, and then attacking others with a ferocity that is not seen in a peaceful, civilized society. And that's happening pretty much not just in United States. If you see what is happening in Britain, Great Britain or London, is now called Londonistan.
Right.
If you see what is happening to the democratic countries in Western Europe, the rock bed of liberalism and wokeism, what is happening there? What's happening in Sweden? It's very unfortunate that the democratic world is caught napping. We are caught napping at this point in time in multiple ways. We are caught napping with a biological warfare, possibly a lab engineered virus coming from Wuhan, China. Pretty much whole of the world was caught napping. Nobody was prepared. Similarly, there is a slow epidemic, almost going now to pandemic proportions, of virus of intolerance and hatred against certain religious groups by people who play the victim card all the time. And this is not just unique to United States, it's happening all over the Europe. People are coming, becoming part of the power structure, and then demanding special privileges. And unfortunately, the current administration in US is not looking behind the immediate short-term political interests. So we have some of these groups that are exploiting and usurping the democratic process, filing resolutions in city councils everywhere all over the United States, funding these resolutions, making political contributions to elected officials as a quid pro quo so that they can pass anti-India resolutions, anti-Hindu resolutions, Hinduphobic resolutions. And that is going on as a normative behavior. And people in the power structure are more concerned in preserving their power rather than seeing that justice is done, whatever is right, and wrongs are not rewarded. That does not seem to be happening.
So this is very important point that you made there, that people are trying to abuse the democratic process, and the democratic system was not ready to deal with that. Today morning, I was having a talk with a former Indian diplomat who was an ambassador to a couple of other countries. And I mentioned to him, and he agreed with me on this point, that the diplomacy and diplomatic services are just part of an ornamental structure of an administration. All that the diplomat does, he prunes the trees, cuts the fruit, and attends to the cosmetic element of the government's stand or the people what they are saying. The real diplomacy is kind of missing. And he agreed with me, because diplomats work under the government instructions. So let me take an example of non-aligned movement, for example. India has always been a part of a, non-aligned movement. It got into our bloodstream. And like diabetes, I call non-aligned movement as a diabetic thing that hurt the Indian body politic. It kind of created a slowness in the system to respond to challenges. That kind of a thing is happening in democratic nations, because the response to tectonic shifts driven by technology, even United States, seems most helpless, because due to technology right now, we are seeing eruptions happening everywhere, And the diplomatic tools are not in a position to respond to those challenges because they are playing the democratic, they are abusing the democratic process, the law. As the saying goes, it's a very powerful saying, that democracy is run by the rule of law, laws are made by men, and men can be managed. So you have laws made, you call yourself a rule of law, a nation of laws, but your laws are ridiculously attacked every time I look at the United States. The fundamental law, people are breaking and walking in this country. So how can you expect people to respect law in the future? You are laying down the seeds of disruption in the process. That's the reason why today's scenario is very simple. If you do not agree with some of the things that Democratic Party says, you are immediately branded as racist or this phobic or that phobic. How does one address? How does a group of people like you and I? And that's the reason why you are saying that fascism is becoming the norm in America right now.
So, Vibhuti, you have brought several interesting points, starting with non-aligned status of India after 1947.
And I would just add here, the non-alignment is a diabetes, is a utopian concept. It has basically eroded the manliness of India. Hum kuch nahi karenge. Think about it. In Afghanistan, for that matter, in that conversation that is happening, Indians are not part of it.
I think I will take a much more nuanced view.
Okay.
We started with non-alignment. Somehow the concept got hijacked by a coterie around the power structure in India, to the extent that it was criticized later on, and the concept that was propounded by the party in opposition at that time was genuine non-alignment. From non-alignment to genuine non-alignment, pointing out that the concept of non-alignment as it was being practiced was one-way alignment. And from genuine alignment, we went into, polyvalent alignments. Okay. And at this point in time, there is enough realization in India and India's diplomatic and policy establishment that the old concepts are no longer workable. And actually, we have to have a mono alignment, that is India alignment. Come what may, we have to be aligned with the interests of India in whatever situation. So that is the story as far as India is concerned. But I think the parallel in the US and in the Western society is that just like the concept of non-alignment was abused by the party in power and by a coterie around the party in power for their selfish motives, the democratic process has been misused, abused, and usurped in liberal Western democracies, including United States. The system is not nimble, system is not savvy enough to take the challenges in this 21st century, post-truth modern world, where wokeness is in vogue. And as you said, that any attempts to correct the narrative leads to accusations of racism, and racism of only one particular kind. So we have arrived at this situation not for the good of any group, but this situation needs to be changed. And people in power need to open their eyes that, the groups they are empowering unnecessarily are going to cause their own downfall. I think that realization is not there. They do not understand that beyond short-term, electoral advantage by getting support of certain, violent extremist groups. in the electoral process, you are striking at the roots of your own democracy. You're striking at the roots of your own survival in future. And that understanding is not there because people have been so brainwashed by the woke concepts that you cannot see what is underneath.
So when people are sleeping and the woke culture is coming up so viciously, the question then arises, where do we go from here? And that's what I wanted to say, that in this context in America, for example, I read one of your articles and I like the title, that India and United States are part-time lovers. You attributed to the part-time lovers. There is a lot of romance that goes on in the name of large democracy, oldest democracy, our shared values. There are certain words used which seems more abused for people like you and I who have seen things from closer quarters. We see there's a lot of brinkmanship that goes on, whatever works. But we have talked about going all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, वो हिंदी का बड़ा अच्छा शब्द है सारांश. ये सारे चीजों का जब सारांश देखते हैं, तो what are we actually witnessing? Is it real? Because I'm concerned about, I'll tell you why. There are times you mentioned that democratic tools are being abused. At some point in time, it will spin off. It will spin off out of control. Totally. And when you have a scenario, when you make laws to play political gamesmanship, कि $900 तक की आपने चोरी की है, तो you are forgiven, you are not put behind bars. So as if it is $899 theft is technically okay, right? As a banker, I know that if you transfer more than $10,000 in cash, or you do something in cash transaction, you have to immediately report. But I know, for instance, when somebody did a smart ass thing by doing $9,999, and one of my employees did it, and I had to address that question to FBI. We had to reprimand that employee. The point which I'm trying to make is, and I'm asking you as a CSR, you have started this wonderful initiative, the strategic, tactical, and when you see the bleeding obvious, what must we Indians do? And I'm focusing on the Indians part of it. We are great contributors to this economy. We are job creators in this economy. Our people are occupying the best of places in many corporate world. Despite that, what more does India need to do to be admitted? Or is it, and I'm throwing that question with full awareness, or is it that we are being targeted? Okay. And I see it as a war room scenario, that our enemies have a complete picture of us on the war table, whether it is a pawn of the chessboard. Everybody is making anti-India moves from time to time, and to me it looks like it is being orchestrated. You can see the whole cacophony of opposition comes together, whereas we forever remains with our Satrap mentality, forever diffused.
So, Vibhuti, you have brought a number of issues.
Which I always do. Because there are many issues.
And I'll try to separate them out.
Sure, please do. Please do.
There are India versus US issues.
Yeah.
There are issues about domestic US politics and, where it is heading and how attacks are, happening on Indian Americans, and how the legal and judicial and electoral process is being abused. So there is a famous saying that there are two things you don't want to witness. One is how sausages are made, and second is how laws are made. Because both are repugnant issues, and again, there is a saying that finally the law is an ass, the way laws are implemented. So there are actually limitations there, and some people have exploited those limitations. But coming back to US-India relationship, yes, I did write in that particular article, India-US Tango Part-Time Lovers. And that was a different era and different time. Situation has changed somewhat at this point in time. But even at that time, it was written, I think, around 2012, I had stated that the future of India-US relationship is good indeed, excellent as long as we do not have high hopes for the moon. We, the two nations and two people, are extremely fascinated by each other's popular culture. People-to-people contact are important, driving behind the bilateral relationship, while business-to-business contacts are increasing. Variously dubbed as natural allies, friends, or strategic partners, the two nations are forging a long road to mutual understanding, international peace, and prosperity. We do share some of the strategic goals, but not all. Our tactical relationship will continue to have ups and downs. And despite sharing democratic and pluralistic values, our strategic long-term goals are at variance with each other's, owing to different geographies. Whether it is the issue of AFPAC or Iran, whether it is NPT or CTBT, we do not see eye to eye with each other. So, like US has concerns about Iran's proliferation activities, but on the other hand, India has been dismayed to see United States over the decades benevolently ignoring Pakistan's clandestine nuclear program. Abetted by China, funded by Saudi Arabia, while the US itself continued to shower dollars on Pakistan's military, intelligence, terrorism complex without batting an eyelid.
Now that's you came at a perfect time with the mentioning of China, Pakistan, because that was my next thought. You know, when I throw a lot of issues to you, it's also to throw the issues to the listeners and viewers, because let them think about it. I would invite you to choose what you consider to be most relevant for you to respond to. So that's the point which I'm trying to say here, is that one thing which I do notice, in my perception, in my reality of life that I have seen around, there are times when they say that you have to smell the coffee, to use the American slang.
Yeah.
You have to see the bleeding obvious. The bleeding obvious which I see, that there is a fine statement that international relationship, there is no permanent friend and no permanent enemy. Yeah, that's fine. I agree with that. Interests govern. But in the case of Pakistan and China, I particularly believe that it's a friendship or relationship that's untenable for reasons which are political, which are religious, and pure reality. So in the case of China, for example, in my opinion, China can handle an economically powerful Japan or an emerging economy like Taiwan or South Korea. But what China will never accept is India as a rising power in Asia. Because India is the only country that is huge in size, huge in population, has a democratic structure. It just doesn't gel with the Chinese part of it. China cannot accept another superpower in Asia. वो कहते हैं ना कि एक म्यान में दो तलवारें नहीं रह सकती हैं. So China sees India as a direct threat. That's why they are very pragmatic about dealing with India. Look at it this way. How many initiatives did Prime Minister Modi make to establish a friendship with him? Called him many times. Modi went to China several times. And what did China do? They stabbed India again. So अब जो है विश्वास खत्म हो चुका है. That I know. I tell you that China doesn't mean well to India. And same is the story with Pakistan. We may not have choice of parents. We may not have choice of neighbors, but we do have choice of friends. Do you think, in my opinion, it's a very direct and simple question. Do you think, not China, but beginning with a country like Pakistan, India must break all its diplomatic and all relationship? As a choice, they are not my friends. I know that. Whatever aman ki asha or whatever Urdu ki zuban mein mohabbat ki baatein ho, Pakistan is never going to be friendly with India because their ambition is driven by the religious diktat. What do you think about it?
Okay, so again, this is like Vibhuti par excellence, bringing multiple issues, starting with the famous saying of Lord Palmerston. Uh, there are no permanent enemies or friends in geopolitics. There are only permanent interests. And actually, Vibhuti ji, I'll go back to my Indian background and I'll tell you something. न कश्चित् कस्य चिन्मित्रम् न कश्चित् कस्य छिद्रपुः व्यवहारेण जायन्ते मित्राणि रिपवस्तथा. This is a subhashitam from Hitopadesha. It says, nobody is your friend forever. Nobody is your enemy forever. In day-to-day dealings, it is the behavior that determines whether somebody is your friend or somebody is your enemy. So we have gone past the stage of non-alignment, and we are seeing actually how India is moving in a different direction, and I think rightly so. You brought the issue of China and Pakistan. I'll deal with Pakistan first and China later. Okay. Pakistan is an abnormal transitory state. It's a temporary phenomenon, creation of British imperialism. Pakistan was created by British colonialists to continue to govern the subcontinent by remote control. Because the imperial government, when there was a pressure came from multiple sides within India, from the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, INA, Indian National Army, post Second World War, British imperialists realized that with few of British expatriates in India, they could not control the country. The armed forces, the Navy, there were mutinies against British imperialists. So the way Pakistan was created was to give a foothold to the colonial imperialists in the subcontinent so they can continue to needle India. And I think you may have seen that from 1947 onwards, there were naysayers. Somebody has called nattering nabobs of negativism, who kept on saying India is going to break up. It's just a matter of time. India has not broken up, Pakistan has. And whatever is remaining of Pakistan, again, that is an artificial creation. And I'm very, very certain that that artificial state will not be there forever. What happened to Yugoslavia? The name has disappeared. Pakistan is in the same category, whatever it is doing. But one thing is very certain. Pakistan is an existential threat to India. Pakistan was born out of sin. Pakistan's raison d'etre is anti-Indiaism. They are in, kind of country in Indian subcontinent. They have the same genealogy, but their culture has changed so much because of their religious belief system. And they say it openly that they want to destroy India. So it's just not possible to have normal relationships with a state that is fountainhead of terrorism. It's a rentier state. I mean, economically and geopolitically, it's a rentier state. It will sleep with anyone in the bed, whoever is willing to pay the night price, whether it is Saudi Arabia one day, whether it's UAE the other day, United States of America maybe 10 years ago, or China at this point in time. So it is a rentier state. In fact, in geopolitics, it's said Pakistan is basically an army, that is governing the territory. So it is not a normal state. There is no way we can fraternalize or have good relations with Pakistan. It's just not possible. It was born out of sin. It was born out of anti-India sentiment. It was conceptualized and created to control India or to destroy India. So we cannot have normal relationship with Pakistan. Coming to China, China is an imperial country. I won't even say new imperial country. It's an imperial country. If you look at map of China over successive centuries, the core China was a very small territory. And they conquered the peripheries, whether it was Tibet, whether it was Xinjiang, whether it is, let's say, up north, Manchuria, whether it is inner Mongolia. These are China's periphery. And China has been expansionist imperialist power from very beginning. And China continues to have its imperialistic ambitions against India. And China is very clear that they do want to break India into pieces, because a strong, united India is not in China's interest, because the only country that can sort of, stand against the Chinese hegemony is India. I think we have had enough of various versions of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai syndrome. Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai was a delusion. This may have been resurrected under the concept of 21st century being Asian country. But what Chinese mean is that 21st century, they would like it to be Chinese century. So again, China claims that they wanted to come through peaceful and harmonious rise. But actually what we have seen is totally different. So China will continue to remain not only just an irritant, not only as a peer competitor, but as a strategic threat number one to India. And in that scenario, we cannot go back to quote unquote non-alignment. We have to build coalitions. And those coalitions include working with United States government. Whoever is heading the regime, that does not matter.
Right.
In fact, I will quote a famous saying by Deng Xiaoping. It does not matter what color is the cat, as long as it catches mice. So it does not matter whoever is governing United States, whether it's Democrats or Republicans. It is India's interest, geopolitical interest, to work with US government to build alliances, to build coalitions, whether it is Quad, whether it's Quad Plus, whether we want to have possibly a new organization in terms of Indo-Pacific community. I think we have to build alliances. And through these alliances, we will be able to deal with the nexus of unholy alliance of China, Pakistan at this time, and possibly other geopolitical threats to India.
This is truly remarkable because, no relationship works in isolation. It's always a combination of influencing factors. So the China and Pakistan scenario does affect the US relationship with India. There is a behavioral issue. And you definitely understand that very well because your study of the subject matter as a professional goes deep into that. So the question then arises, and that's what I'm talking about, that while you see what I see is that the Chinese intent and the Pakistani intent is absolutely anti-India, which you confirm right now. But these two countries are very close to United States in many ways. Pakistan, as you said, will sleep with anyone that pays them. And China, because it wants to establish as a champion of whatever, as an imperial force against American hegemony or American domination of the world. Where does India fit in here now? That's really important for us Indians living here. So many of us, I interact with a lot of people. I see a lot of enthusiasm amongst Indians today in America about trying to find an identity, which is very good. However, what I also find is they are all grappling in the dark, or they're all looking for leadership. So people talk about Hindus में unity नहीं है. Indians are not united. Hindus have no unity. Indians don't find unity. Look, I mentioned in one of the forums, and I said in one of my programs, that remember, unity is not a product which is or inventory item sitting on the shelf of a factory or a company that you go and buy. And you say, okay, voila, here is unity. It happens behind a purpose. Just as it happened in the US, when a lot of groups coalesced to stand up against Audrey Truschke of Rutgers, or it happened when the symbol of swastik was attacked. And I'm asking all Indians here is find the purpose behind which to unite. Create a community of interest that you need to unite for. Knowing your enemy, knowing what we know now, if we do not unite behind a purpose to safeguard our interest, safeguard our children's lives, because that's what the real politic is all about, whether we like it or not. अगर हम न्यूयॉर्क में रहते हैं, तो occasionally we will have to tolerate the nor'easter. If you are living in California, you are constantly living under the threat of a rattling and a shaking of the earth, or the big one, which is supposed to come in the last 1,000 years. So we have to recognize the bleeding obvious, the absolute reality. How do you see the forging of the unity of purpose amongst the NRIs in this part of the world and globally? In the absence of paucity of time that we have to, I want to wrap up with this question, and I would right away request you that let's talk about these issues more in terms of narrative building and creating the scenario that NRIs begin to get active.
So if I go back to the relationship between US, Pakistan, China, and India, the adage was that there are no zero-sum games in geopolitics. That is what US diplomats used to tell Indians when Indian diplomats will complain about Pakistan's behavior and US's acceptance and tolerance of that bad behavior and rewarding that behavior. But if you see in a broad, sweep of time, India-US relationship has evolved, and there have been 4 phases. The first phase was from 1947 to 1985. The second phase was from 1985 to year 2000. The third phase was from year 2000 to year 2020. We are witnessing emergence of a new era in US relationship, and I'll tell you why I divide into those phases. From 47 to 85, it was just Cold War mentality in US policy establishment. In 85, when Reagan was the president during his second term and Rajiv Gandhi came to power, there was some, hope that this dashing young man will play a role in India's destiny. Around the same time in 1985, the US-Soviet Union relationship started to move in a different direction. Gorbachev came into power. So India was not just another Cold War ally of USSR, but it was emerging democracy. There was some qualitative change at that point in time. Year 2000, change started, and that change was started by one remarkable person that people don't even remember. And that person's name is Jaswant Singh. There was a round of 11 rounds of Jaswant Singh stroke Talbot talks around various parts of the world following 1998 Pokhran 2 nuclear testing. Once that dialogue was over and Clinton's hostility towards India was over, essentially because of second term limit, the new administration took India in a very different light. Indian Americans and Indians geopolitically we got given a lot of respect after Pokhran 2 explosions. So then the third phase started. And last 2 decades, we have seen whether the administration is Democratic or Republican, Indo-US relationship has continued to thrive. Till 2020, despite mercurial nature of Donald Trump, India-US relationship was in a good phase. Now, this is the fourth phase starting, and there are a lot of questions. Where are we heading? What are we going to do? Historically, during the process of elections, and if you, follow through the careers, both president and vice president have made stringently anti-India statements, and they have been cause of concern. Yes, after coming to power, they have made pro-India statements also. But we are dealing with a global biological warfare. Pretty much everyone is afflicted. The post-COVID-19 pandemic geopolitics is yet to be visualized. And the interests of various nations in post-COVID-19 geopolitics will determine what shape US-India relationship takes place. I hope it is for good of both countries. I hope the US administration is wiser after learning what Wuhan virus did. There's an Indian fable of Bhasmasur and Mohini.
But
so
all viewers would be knowing about it. Yes, so say it, please.
So Bhasmasur has been created, and now you has to turn into Mohini to make Bhasmasur self-destruct, and that will have to be done. Again, that is the geopolitics. If you see, again, I went through the history to see why Pakistan was a useful client state for United States. They used this client state during Nixon administration for making an announced visit to China and getting into relationship with China to neutralize the Soviet Union. That was their existential threat. But in the process of courting China, they didn't realize, the America is a very infant country as far as civilizational issues are concerned. They just don't understand the nuances of civilizational issues. They did not understand what they were doing to China would actually come back to bite them. They did not realize that allowing WTO entry to China in 2000 without any benchmarks or parameters as a developing economy with all the advantages given to China, China just exploited those. So hopefully the policy establishment in US has learned from those mistakes, and in post-COVID-19 geopolitics, the Biden administration learns from these, Himalayan blunders and does course correction. And in that scenario, India and US interests geopolitically would converge and will be working, together. What would be the implications on the diaspora in US? Great. If your mother country where you were born is doing good, you take pride in that. Everyone takes pride in that. Before 1998 Pokhran explosion, how the Western society, Western, media, Western diplomats used to describe India as a basket case. No more. India is respected despite all the negative things. And once the COVID-19 pandemic is controlled, and I'm sure it will be controlled, there is going to be finite end to that. The geopolitics of that scenario is going to be different. And Indian American community would be empowered by a strong rise of India on the global scene.
That's very powerful. There is a very powerful message that you have given, and paucity of time will not allow us to continue more. But as I said, we'll invite you to come again and talk more about specific issues and issues that affect us. But you made very important point that I hope people will learn post coronavirus, post Wuhan virus. The diplomatic channels will definitely work towards establishing new alliances, because things that are people know. So the point which I'm trying to say is very important for Indian diaspora, and that's what is important for me to share that thought, taking the cue from you. Wise people learn from other people's mistakes, fools by their own. So I'm requesting Indian community to recognize a few things. Get out of this emotional sentimentality about things, of everything that goes around. Become a logical understanding, acquire a logical understanding to create the memorable experience. That's important to remember that. Let's bear in mind. You mentioned too that United States is the oldest democracy, but civilizational wise, it is a very new one. Whereas in reverse, we are a 72-year young democracy, but civilizational, a very influential authority, power. What led to the destruction of India that we know? And what I wanted to say is that let's learn our history. And I want to point out to all the viewers today, hey, guys, like, share the video, subscribe to us, press the bell button, join us in this journey, because it's important that how our history is taught, the sense of shared values and whatever else is important. We have to kind of unite to do this. Where it will come from? It will come from the issues. We have to learn our own history. Look up 1941 census. That ought to be the awakening of the Indian diaspora worldwide. 1941 census. There were 145,000 and odd British in this country, in India, plus women and children. They ruled us millions, using our people, using our resources against us, enriching themselves, and making us impoverished. Get to learn these realities. Insofar as Indo-US affairs are concerned, for the Indian diaspora, let's get engaged in our communities. Whether it's Parents Teachers Association, whether it is your community that you live in, begin to talk about yourself. Don't feel shy. We all have a very powerful history to share. In my conversation with Americans, they say, why the hell don't you tell us about yourselves? And that's the reason, is that we have to empower ourselves to be able to talk about it. Adityanjee, thank you very much for joining today. I would say, as eventually, Satyameva Jayate. But knowing what we know now, what we must do is very important. As I always say, and that's my favorite thing, your enemy is knowing what to do to you. Are we doing what we must? And that's the question everybody must ask to himself or herself, and prepare to answer that. Thank you very much for joining. Once again, request, like, share the video, join, subscribe the show, and let's talk again next week. Adityanjee, you want to say something?
It was absolute pleasure, Vibhuti, discussing these issues with you. I will end with just one sentence. Indian Renaissance has just started. Wait and watch. We have the power to scale the heights, and we shall do it.
We shall do it. As I say it again, I'll say it again, Satyameva Jayate. Let's fight for it. But nothing is given to you. Thank you. Viewers, take care.